we all got into building businesses because we thought by doing it, we could unlock a better world for ourselves. Generosity unlocks a grace-based mindset. When you make a decision to be generous, it not only helps other people, but it helps yourself. Great teams, they require very little checking and looking over the shoulder. You hire motivated people that are going to police and manage and motivate themselves. There's really two dimensions as a manager. One is you are the source of the challenge in their work. So the other side of support challenge matrix is the support that I'm giving them to help them get there. When it comes to your core values, it needs to be an absolute monoculture. It becomes this really powerful thing that the people that are about what you're about, they get there and it's like, man, I'm home.
Mike's super excited to geek out on culture and generosity. I want to start with generosity. Like I mentioned at the top of the episode, you had a great podcast called Scaling for Good, where you talk about how you built Simple Modern. You talk about the vision behind it, how you incorporate all those things. It's more than just a business. You're trying to do a lot deeper things with the company and the org. And you have an episode in Scaling for Good where you talk about generosity. And I loved, I thought what was so fascinating was how you talk about why generosity is so important for you in a business. And one of the reasons you'd think generosity, it deals with everyone else, right? Which largely it does. But one of your reasons in there talks about like how it actually shapes you as a human, which I thought was interesting and a little counterintuitive. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like how is building a generous business good for you?
Yeah. So let's start kind of high level that I think all of us can be a little bit cynical about people's motivations, right? And about philanthropy and all of that. And I've actually started to lean in more to unpacking the self-interest side of generosity so that it doesn't come across as unobtainable or, okay, I guess some people that are just wired very differently than me could think that way, but that I actually believe we're all wired in a way where generosity unlocks our best self and actually allows us to get the most enjoyment out of things. So it's easy when you're talking about generosity to say like, oh, you make all this impact in other people's lives. But what gets talked about less is the impact that it has on you. We all got into building businesses because we thought by doing it, we could unlock a better world for ourselves. There's two ideas that I would say are antonyms. First one is entitlement. Entitlement is when I focus my emotions and my thoughts and I focus them on when are the times where I didn't get what was fair. I didn't get what I earned. I didn't get what I deserved, right? And as anybody can attest, we've all had these thoughts, right? And they're an incredible downer, right? Like when I focus on, man, somebody else got that promotion and I didn't, or somebody else got that recognition and I didn't, and I deserved it. It incites anger, it incites frustration, it incites all these things, right? Bitterness, right? So the opposite idea, like the antonym of entitlement, I'm going to say is this idea of grace, which is there are some times in my life where I've gotten so much better than what fair is, right? And when I get so much better than fair, then that inspires a very different set of emotions, right? Gratefulness and happiness and thankfulness and all these other things. And just like I'll draw an analogy to a car. A car can go, forward, it can go back, it can go drive or reverse, but it can't do both at the same time. In the same way, I would argue that internally, the way that we're wired, we have an infrastructure that can go towards entitlement or it can go towards grace, but we can't do both at the same time because they're opposites. And that which of those we choose over time ends up having this dramatic impact in our relationships, in our happiness, in the way that we view life. So if that's true, and I feel really strongly that that's true, that no matter how much money you have, no matter how much success you have, if you're stuck in an entitlement mindset, you're going to be a miserable person. And conversely, some people that have not had a lot of things that go their way, that have a grace mindset, you'll see them be incredibly satisfied and happy. That it's almost as if, Andrew, that our satisfaction as a person isn't actually tied to our circumstances, but it's tied to something else. It's tied to our mindset. And once you make that unlock, then you realize, oh, well, then it's incredibly important for me to do whatever I can to foster that mindset,
Yeah, it made me think. I think you were a pastor before you got into being in e-commerce, and it makes me think. I can't remember if I where I heard this, but someone once said like, there's this very common concept of tithing in a lot of faiths, right?
Yeah,
Like giving the money. And I heard someone say once, like, why would God ask you to tithe? Like, if you believe in God, you probably believe He's this all powerful being in the whole universe. Like, He doesn't need your money. He doesn't need your thousands.
right,
He doesn't need it. So why
right.
does He ask? And the point they were making was like, because just doing that, one, it gives you faith, it gives you reliance on something other than yourself. But also, it just changes you and changes who you are, and that is the more important part. And obviously, both are important, but that stuck with me. And I always thought that was fascinating because for so long, I thought I was like, oh, hey, my money is doing what, other people, that is, and it's true to some extent, but I think that's, that's not the only thing. And maybe even as the secondary thing, which is kind of
It's
crazy.
a great point. And one of the things that I'm very open, my faith is an important part of my life, but one of the things I also like to talk about is you don't have to necessarily share the faith perspective I have to come out at the same place. Like, look at this from two different angles. Either, what I believe from a faith perspective is true, and that God tells us to do this for a reason and it's exactly what you said, or let's say it's not true. Let's say I'm deluded, there is no God. Then why is it throughout all of human history that all these different people groups have independently come to this idea that giving is something that we should do and is important to us? Wouldn't that signal something to us about the human condition, that it's just important innately for us to be a part of giving in order to thrive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you, when you think about generosity, like you've got, and we'll get into kind of some of the nonprofit work you do with Simple Modern in a minute here. How do you think about that, like with just internally with your team? Because this is something that's external facing, of course, but it's also like a core part of your culture and how you build your team. There's the monetary aspect of like, paying well and salary and bonuses and things like that. And maybe you can touch on that if you feel like that's critical, but that's one of the more obvious ones. What are some of the lesser obvious ones where you can still incorporate this into your culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, for years, I've talked about generosity, and I actually feel like I've continued to grow and evolve in how I describe it in a way that's more helpful. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. Is generosity about writing checks, or is it about something more than that? This is an important question. And it's easy for us to think about generosity as the giving of money towards a thing. But I would define generosity is separate from that. It's actually more of a posture of like, I have everything I have, I'm holding with open hands, and I want to use it not just for my own benefit, but I want to share it for the benefit of other people. And that includes my money, to be sure, but also that includes everything I have. That could include how I use my house. That could include the talents I have. That could include the time I have. That could include the words that I say. All of these things. It could include how I think about using my social media platform, and how I write. There's everything in my life could kind of be put together. And that generosity is this attitude of, I'm going to use all of that, not just for my benefit, but for the benefit of other people. Not just because it's good for them, but because it's good for me as well. And so within the company, I realized that we have this commitment to giving 10% of our profits. It's a big part of what we were founded on. It was very painful in the early years when we were bootstrapped to actually do this, but we did it. And it's grown to, last year it was $3.5 million. We think it could be 5 point something million dollars next year. It's grown to a really material amount. But if you're not careful, you start to create the message, whether intentionally or not, that giving is writing big checks. And the problem with that is that if that's the definition of giving, then I'm the leader and everybody else is the follower, right? Or me and a few of the other owners are the leaders because we have the ability to write the biggest checks. And so we're the leaders and everybody else is a follower. But if instead, if you say, actually, generosity is this really holistic, whatever you've got, however you're situated, using that freely, not just for your benefit, but for the benefit of other people, then you know what? All of a sudden, every single person in my organization, they can be a leader in generosity. Now, it's going to look different than it will for me. So that it's not going to look the same in terms of monetary giving, but there are ways that they can be generous that I can't be. Like, my time is really encumbered now. Like, it's very difficult for me to give time. And for some people, they have a lot of time that they can give towards helping people. So for some people, it's just as simple as, how do you use your words Are you a person that's using your words to build up and to affirm and to teach and to encourage? Like it costs no money. It just costs deliberateness, right? To do that. For other people, it's like, hey, I have skills that I've learned. I'm going to share those with other people. Really simple example. We've got a very young company. There's a lot of women that are having their first child in our company. And one of the coolest things is to see older women giving their time and their experience and helping these new moms to be able to get through this period. But the idea is creating a systemic culture of being open handed with the things we have for the benefit of other people, where everybody leads. One of the things about culture that I love to say, culture is like a garden, and it only thrives if everybody waters the plants, everybody picks the weeds, and everybody fertilizes the soil, right? If culture is just we're saying, hey, here's our culture statement, it's on the wall, and Mike is up front and he's kind of he's the leader of the culture, then that's a weak culture. It's completely dependent upon me, and you may or may not even have buy-in across the organization. But if instead you have a culture where everybody feels like, yeah, we're about generosity and I am a leader in that, I help set the pace in that in some way, that's a really robust culture that as your organization scales, it's going to continue to be a key part of who you are. And that's probably one of the biggest things we've learned as we've scaled to 100 employees. I used to think that culture naturally falls apart as you get bigger. And the reason for that is as you get bigger, like the gravity just gets larger. There's
Mm-hmm.
more and more of a tendency to just revert to the mean, right? To just become kind of a representation of the world around you, whatever that culture is. The only thing that counterbalances that, and it's an even more powerful force, is if everyone in the culture owns what you're about, then all of a sudden, that culture is very strong. And when new people come into the culture, all of the societal pressure in a positive way is towards adopting the culture and taking it on. And it becomes this kind of, virtuous flywheel where that culture, as it picks up people, it actually gets stronger and stronger and stronger instead of weaker and weaker.
How do you reinforce that? You mentioned, in the Scaling for Good podcast, we'll link up to that in the show notes. How when you have everyone that comes in, like when they start, you kind of talk to them about what the business is about, and they know already to some degree, but you do a deep dive, you talk about the values, why you're here, focus on
Mm-hmm.
generosity and some of these other things. And then you more or less, kind of hand off the baton to them, saying to some degree, like, hey, this is with you now, you're responsible for this, which makes a lot of sense. Very cool. But that in and of itself doesn't seem like it'd be enough. As a skeptical person from the outside looking in, I just think that would work for a couple months, or a couple weeks, maybe a couple months. But to get 100 people on the page with that, there's got to be something else that you're doing. Maybe it's your crazy careful with your hiring process. Maybe you're doing something intentionally every couple of weeks to focus on these things to reinforce them. What are the other things that you're doing to keep that culture very much apart? And obviously, you're trying to lead to that. But it just seems like there's got to be more to keep that culture so strong than just that initial meeting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's an all of the above answer. So we are exceptionally intentional with how we hire. And a big part of our hiring process is we have an in-person work environment. Like 90 something percent of our team is in Oklahoma. And to get hired at this company, you basically have to have had a close relationship with someone inside the company, or somebody
Mhm.
that we are close with, that somebody inside of the company is close with. Because our view is it is one thing to say, I'm excited about what this culture is about and these values. It's a different thing to have lived it out. And you would hope that what your culture does is it takes people that are already passionate about what you want to be, and it makes it easier for them to go further in those things than they ever have before. Even strong cultures really struggle with changing people that don't actually hold the core values. Just, I mean, this is a
Mm.
simple example of this. I recently watched the Patriots Dynasty documentary on Apple TV, and they talked about the tight end. Is it Aaron? I'm blanking his name, Rodriguez or Gonzalez, the one that was basically ended up being arrested for murder and convicted for murder. But it was this really interesting thing where in the documentary, I think Bob Kraft is the one who said it, like that we probably overestimated the ability of our culture to change people who didn't actually subscribe to our culture. And even really strong cultures can't beat somebody who's not values aligned. So I would say selection is so much of it. And one kind of aside I would make here, we are not building rockets that need to land themselves, right? Like we are talking about running like Facebook campaigns or ordering product from China. And so this idea that the most important thing with who we hire is how much skill set they have in a particular area, I think is actually flawed. What we have found is that we can take people that know nothing about Amazon and we can put them on our account. And I think our Amazon track record speaks for itself. We've been one of the most successful companies to sell on Amazon in the last 10 years. And we've done it largely with people that had never done it before. The reason why I think that's been possible is that we've taken people with high aptitude and we've taught them, because this is not brain surgery that we're doing. But we've focused a lot more on the character side of it. And we've gone character, aptitude in that order. And by doing that, we've stayed very, very true to the kind of culture and values that we're trying to build. And so it's worked really well for us. And I would encourage other brands to take that mindset of, even more important than the level of experience somebody has is, what is their character? What is the fit relationally with the rest of your team? What is the aptitude? And if those things are there, most likely they're going to be able to come in and be a really strong contributor. The other thing that we do is we have our person that's in charge of hiring. We call him the chief culture officer. And in addition to hiring, he handles exactly what you're talking about. We are trying to create touch points throughout the week where culture is held up and emphasized within the company.
Now,
A
what
bunch
does
of
it
different
look?
ways this looks. On Tuesday mornings, we get together every Tuesday morning for an hour, and usually we'll either have new hires. They'll share some about themselves. I will share something about our mission, vision, values. We'll have another leader speak. But the entire point is cultural development. So we invest 50 something hours a year right there. But we do a lot more than that. Like at this point, we've got a book club that I lead that anybody in the company can be a part of. Right now, we're going through the book multipliers. And it's a discussion group. We have a ton of different leadership development things that we're offering. And so the reality here is, you get the culture you earn. You get the culture you deserve. And if you invest a lot of time and a lot of deliberateness, then you will be able to build an excellent culture. But it will not happen accidentally, and it won't happen without intentional investment in it and intentionally aiming at it. So you mentioned one of the things we do, that the very first day an employee is hired, I will sit down with them and I will walk through our mission, vision, values. Now they've seen these before; they've seen them in the hiring process, and we filtered for these things in the hiring process. But I will sit down and walk through those things with people really intentionally, as will our chief culture officer in a separate meeting. Because if you don't know exactly what you're aiming for, then I don't know how you could possibly hope to hit it. And this is the reality with most organizations, is everything is viewed through the filter of, how do we grow the organization financially? And we add people when we need another pair of hands to do something, and not a lot of thought or intent is given towards, okay, how is this all going to fit together, and is this all going to work? So let's bring it back to a point that we talked about at the beginning. Why does this matter from a selfish perspective? From a selfish perspective, I can go longer than other founders. I've gone from zero to 215 million in revenue. I haven't burned out. Why? A big part of why I haven't burned out is because I am surrounded by people I really enjoy. I am in an environment where I feel challenged in a good way, and I feel like I'm becoming a better version of myself because we've been so intentional with culture. So we've invested all this in it, and it's helped the business to be more successful, but it's actually improving my standard of living, and it's actually improving the economic outcome, not just because we do better work, but because I am in no hurry to do a transaction or get away from the company because I love going to work every day. If I sold the company, I would be really, really sad about the experience that I would lose of going to work. And so I would encourage founders, if nothing else, for your own selfishness, be intentional about building a culture that is awesome, that you love, that attracts people that are value aligned. But for sure, as you do that and you impact other people's lives, I think you'll get more and more passionate about it. The stories that I hear from people that have joined, I mean, one of the more encouraging things I can hear is I'll have spouses send me messages and just say, "Hey, it has been transformative for my wife or my husband to work at your company." And not only has it transformed them, but it's transformed my family. They take things that they see at work and it plays out with how they interact with the kids. And this is one of the things that we have this unique opportunity to do as entrepreneurs. We have this ability to impact the world by how we hire and the kind of cultures we create. So it's an awesome opportunity and responsibility.
What are the things, I mean, you mentioned generosity. We talked about it at the beginning, character, honesty. There's kind of some givens, right? Like you need to be honest. You need to
Yeah.
have, you're already filtering through people, which I think is such a good hack. And if you have the patience to do it, makes so much sense. Because the more and more I have a fraction of the hiring experience that a lot of people listening and yourself have, but the more and more I hire, the more and more I think it's all, I want to try to have references that I trust deeply. References are so hard to get if you don't have a really trusted third party because they're so
Yeah,
very, very rarely are people that you don't know and don't have rapport with going to give you the real story when they,
that's right. They don't
refer
have
someone
any
else.
incentive to
There's
tell you, "Hey,
zero
this person
incentive.
is a bad fit." Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So if you can get a trusted reference or a third party like you're doing, and then also just get them in the role and working as quickly as possible. Anyway, where I'm going with this is, what are you, outside the obvious things, what are you really looking for? If you're thinking about bringing me on, Mike, what are
Mhm.
you or the hiring managers really sussing out? What questions are you asking? What things are you diving into to make it to make sure it's a great cultural fit? Not just that I'm going to be okay, but like you're going to love having someone like me there. What are you really looking for? What questions are
Oh
you asking?
man, it's great. There's probably a battery of things, but I'll just give a few dimensions that I'm looking for. I mean, one thing I'm trying to really understand is what drives you. Like,
Hmm.
what is that central mechanism inside of you that drives you every day? And I'm probably looking for, and I'm looking for high drive. Like, you can't teach motor. This is one thing that like people either have it or they don't, and that you can take somebody who has high motor but hasn't found the best way to kind of funnel it and help them to be more effective. But it's just really difficult to teach somebody who doesn't have high motor. And that's okay. Like sometimes somebody doesn't have a high motor at work because all of their passion is towards things outside of work, and that's fine. Not a great fit for our team. Like where we think about what we're looking for is the most driven, most excellent people that we've ever met that have the highest character. Like whatever that Venn diagram is, what we're really aiming for. So I'm looking for drive, and I'm looking for an example that they have a really high internal standard for themselves. So an example of this is, have they achieved excellence in any area of their life? It doesn't really matter what it is. I love to use this example, but when we grew Amazon, it was mostly Brian and I, my co-founder, that were doing the work on Amazon. And then we got to the point where, okay, we need to clearly hire some people. And one of the first people that we looked hard at, and we ended up hiring her, and she works for this company to this day. She had a PR background, that she'd worked in PR for 2 years. She was probably 23, 24. And so there was nothing on her resume that said she's going to be awesome at Amazon. But she had been a part of the St. Louis Ballet as a teenager.
Hmm.
And that is an incredibly demanding thing to achieve, right? Like you have to be very dedicated to reach that level of achievement in anything. And we saw that and we said, okay, that's drive, right? Like that's a person that holds themselves to a high standard, and is willing to really work towards something. So we look for that. Is there high drive, and is there example of that high drive evidenced by them pushing themselves to really unlock a level of excellence in an area of their life? Another thing that I would look for is, what are they willing to make sacrifices for, and what are some examples of them doing that in their life? So you can start to get into somebody's value hierarchy by doing that. Like if I said, hey Andrew, do you think excellence is a good thing? You'd say, of course, everybody would. But if I said, do you think relationships are a good thing? You'd say, sure, of course, I value relationships. And if I said, okay, if you're in a situation where someone you have a close relationship has put together work that is not good enough, what do you say to them? And all of a sudden, I start to get a sense of your value hierarchy. You might value relationships and value excellence, but which do you value more? And how do you make those trade-off decisions? So I'm kind of trying again to deconstruct how people are wired on the inside, like what motivates them. Um, and that's a lot of what we do. We're trying to understand motivations. There's very little of the, hey, help me understand the depth of your skill set in X or
Hmm.
Y, and a lot more of like how do you function on the inside, and then us projecting that out within the context of our culture and our community. And then I think we're also evaluating, hey, relationally, do we think this person will fit and get along well? Because we have a really relationally integrated company, is the way I'd say it. And we've done a lot of things. Like one thing I didn't mention earlier, we bring in lunch every single day to the company. We pay for lunch. And the reason why we bring in lunch and we pay for it every day is that it creates this context where people are eating together and they're talking to each other and developing relationships with each other. And so it doesn't really work if somebody's values aligned and they're really driven, but relationally they don't really get along with anybody else. Like that's not going to be a win. When you get a bunch of people that are aligned with each other, what ends up happening and relationally connected with each other, what ends up happening is churn goes to the floor, right? Because people don't
Hmm.
want to leave. Like my friend, I work with all my friends. Like I'm a part of a community, and I want to be a part of that community. Like so, it's interesting because I think we can tend to associate peak performance with aptitude and skill. But for just a second, let's think about sports. The best teams are almost never the super team that gathered a bunch of all stars and year one they were awesome, right? Even if we look at some of the examples, like let's the Heat with LeBron James, or like some of the super teams that have worked, even if we looked at those examples, their best form took years to unlock because that's the way that teams work. It's not just about talent, it's actually about how that talent works together. And so my belief is that great teams are a result of a combination of aptitude, drive, and then the compounding of time and working together with each other. So the active kind of pushing back and working against attrition and entropy and turnover is a really huge part of building highly effective teams. And the relational connectedness is a big part of that. So there's probably several others that we ask, but those are a few of the things that we're trying to, for better or for worse, qualitatively assess.
Yeah. And what's the trade-off for the bargain, or what's the ask that you make of the employees? I always think it's interesting, like
Mm,
you're hiring
that's a great question.
someone, you're selling them, right? It's like the moment in time where when you make a job offer, it flips, right? You have all the power until you make a job offer to someone, and then it flips, and all of a sudden you have to sell them on the company. But I
Yeah.
think it's honest companies are very upfront about who they are, what they value, what they are going to provide if you come on the team, and also what they expect in a really big thing. And so you have an amazing work culture. You are very value aligned. You're doing great work. You're doing it beyond just the goal of making money, with high caliber people. But what is the ask that you ask for people coming in? Like, what are they, like you said, what are you willing to trade? Like, what do people have to trade at Simple Modern to be on the team?
It's a great question. I think that we don't ask people to trade their personal lives. In fact, we're pretty explicit about we want you to have some balance and we want you to be able to have important relationships that you really nurture. One of the things I talk about in the mission, vision, values when I go through it is part of your job here is being excellent relationally, both inside and outside the company. So that's an expectation that, and it's an expectation I have on myself. So one thing is like, hey, you're going to engage. and you are going to get connected to your coworkers, and we are going to ask you to really lean in there. Um, but we don't ask it to be like an all-consuming thing. I think another ask is that you are going to push yourself to your limits, and that you are not going to need to be somebody that we manage. That you are going to manage yourself. And there's actually tons of literature out here on this particular subject of just great teams. They require very little, checking and looking over the shoulder. You hire motivated people that are going to police and manage and motivate themselves. And then all of the energy in the organization is not directed towards getting people to do what you want them to do, but it's towards solving problems. So I think you have to self govern. And this is not a good place for you if you don't self govern. I think another trade off that's interesting, if you think about strong culture, here's a hallmark. They are monocultures in several ways. And so for all like the benefits that we can get from diversity in some ways, when it comes to your core values, it needs to be an absolute monoculture. Like we're about excellence, and we have no room and we have no tolerance for anybody who doesn't care about excellence. Like you're not welcome here, and you're not going to like it here, right? We're about generosity. And so if you don't like the fact that we're giving away some money that we could be bonusing out, then you're not going to like it here. You're just not, it's not for you, and that's fine. And so what that does is it becomes this really powerful thing that the people that are about what you're about, they get there and it's like, man, I'm home, right? These are my people. My whole life, I felt like most people didn't get me, and I'm now surrounded by people that get me, and now I can do my best work. So I think that that's probably for us the strongest ones are that we are going to be absolutely maniacally monoculture on our values, and we are going to expect you to self-govern, and we're going to expect you to lean in relationally, not just professionally. We're going to expect you to take responsibility for your own development. I mean, obviously we're going to want to develop you as well. And that those things, for most of our people, they're like, I'm happy to make that trade. Some people don't want to make that trade, right? But for the people that are on our team and our culture, they're like, that's a great trade. I'll happily make that trade for what you're offering.
Would you say, safe to say, I don't think I know the answer to this, but safe to say that 95%, if not 100% of people on your team are fairly low drama, take feedback really well, and are able to work through, like, very emotionally mature and relationally mature?
Yeah, I would say that that is a requirement to be here. That if you cannot accept feedback, then eventually you won't be here. And fortunately, like we just our track record, we've had so few people leave the company over 9 years. But that is absolutely like, do you have the emotional maturity to separate your identity from your ideas and your identity from your
Hmm.
work? We talk about that a lot. That um, there's a lot of people who find all of their identity and all of their sense of self in their title or their work or their accomplishments, and those people are very difficult to work with, it turns out. And those people are very resistant to any kind of feedback that challenges them, because it really strikes at the heart of who they feel like they are. So willingness to take feedback, and one of our core values is growth mindset, and growth mindset is all about, hey, you can get better at anything through effort and failure. And so people with really high growth mindset typically love feedback, because it's like, oh, this is great. Andrew's giving me feedback and I can get better as a result of that. And people who don't have growth mindset really, are like, I don't want to hear your feedback. Like, in fact, I want to avoid exposing any place where I'm not very good, so that you'll have a high opinion of me. Whereas growth mindset people don't think that way at all. They're like, I don't care. I don't care if I fail. I gave a talk to our company recently, and the idea was really simple. It's unlocking your best work requires this combination of our values of collaboration, excellence, growth mindset, and humility. And I kind of wove together how those things connect. But on a very basic level, unlocking your best self and your best work requires growth mindset and humility. Because if you're not willing to fail, you're never going to get there. You're never going to be able to achieve what you're capable of. Because taking, like, let's just use an example of weightlifting. This is something I've been doing a lot of recently. I've gotten into weightlifting. How do you make your body stronger? By taking your body to failure. And then your body says, oh, okay, I couldn't do that thing. I'm going to make myself stronger. And then the next time you're a little bit stronger. And it turns out that everything we work this way. You've got to push yourself to failure, whether we're talking about sales or marketing or managing or recruiting or whatever else. And that we're okay with the humiliation that comes from getting to failure. Because the other thing that comes from getting to failure is unlocking the next level. And there are some people that love that idea and embrace it. And then there's a lot of the population that runs away from it.
Yeah. And I mean, you're sussing out if people have, where people have reached excellent in their personal and professional life earlier is a great filter for that. How many times, or have you had to have people come in, seem like they were a good fit relationally? They come in, they're excellent performers. They're really good at specific role X, Y, or Z. But on some of those other relational issues, there's some drama or there's some problems there. Have you had to cut those people go? How often does that happen? Because that's got to be
I
a
would say
really hard thing to do when somebody's performing super well on
yes.
the task they have, but relationally there's issues. That's a hard thing to have to make a decision
I
on.
would say once. I'd say there was one really key example of that, and it was really challenging, And it's somebody that I really care about them and enjoy them as a person. And one of the ways that I'll describe this to people in the company is that I have two different hats I wear. I have a hat of Mike the person, and then I have a hat of Mike the CEO, and those are different hats. And so Mike the person, like I told this person like I really care about you. I care about your family. I appreciate many things about you. But when I have Mike, the CEO hat on, you are not fitting culturally and it isn't working. And so I have to be willing, even though you are great at what you do and you make a lot of contributions for the sake of the team. Because the other thing that what the dynamic that we saw that started to happen is it's hard for other people to grow if they're that when that person exists. A lot of times the trade-off is something's not working organizationally. You have somebody that's a really good performer, but culturally they're not a very good fit. And
Mm-hmm.
so they can continue to put out good work, but your ability to develop and level up other people is really constrained because of that dynamic. And listen, a lot of times it's not that they're a bad person. It's just for whatever reason, it's not working relationally, it's not working culturally. So I try not to view it as like good or bad, but I think being aware that sometimes, hey, this is just not it's just not working. And being willing to do the hard thing. And honestly, I think if there's been a downside to how relationally connected we are, it's that I was slow to do something in that particular case, and I can be really hesitant because I do care about the people. And but that's where like, hey, what's even more important to me than one individual person is the entire culture and
Yeah.
maintaining the entire culture. So the two extremes you can fall off. One is it's all performance. Everybody's a cog. Nobody matters. They're all interchangeable. I treat people totally transactionally. The other extreme is it's all relational. It's a big family. There's no accountability. Once you're here, we couldn't possibly think of losing you. And you've got to find a place where I think you want to lean more towards relational than transactional, but that you've got to have a certain level of standards and accountability or it doesn't work. So that's a lot of for me over the years has been finding what's that balance where there's an appropriate amount of bar setting and accountability to go with the relational nature of what we're building.
Yeah. I want to dive in a little bit more. I feel like for me, I always liken it to walking this super fine tightrope. Like people are the best and the
Mm-hmm.
hardest part of business. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're a good leader, you walk this incredibly thin tightrope between having a backbone and having a deep relational care for the people that you're leading. And I think it's hard to get right. You have a framework in your business called the support challenge matrix, where you try to help balance those two things. Can you talk a little bit about that? How does that look and work, and how does that kind of manifest in the company?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about it, there's really two dimensions as a manager that you are really impacting the people that report to you. One is you are the source of the challenge in their work. You are the one saying to them, hey, we need to accomplish this goal. We need to take that hill. We need to be able to do this thing that we can't currently do, and you're in charge of it. So you're setting the bar for like what we're trying to accomplish and what they're trying to reach or achieve. And you have to challenge people to unlock their best work and for the organization to thrive. And often that means you have to challenge them at a level that's uncomfortable. That's a level maybe beyond what they think they can achieve. It's interesting. Like if you read the research, people will say time and again that their best work usually comes in an environment where somebody expected more of them than they thought they could actually do. And then
100%.
they were able to rise to the challenge. So if we're going to lead people well, we have to be willing to challenge them even to a level that's uncomfortable, even to a level sometimes that seems unreasonable. Otherwise, they're never going to fully unlock what they're capable of doing. But if all we provide people is challenge, it is a soul killing experience where we feel underappreciated and under resourced. So, if it could be reasonable for me to say to somebody, hey, I want to get this channel to $10 million. That could be a reasonable goal, depending upon how much resources I give them to accomplish that goal and how much time I give them to accomplish that goal. If I said, hey, I want this to be it's at $0, I want it to be at $10 million, and I want you to do it in the next 15 days, that's, comically bad because there's no way. It's just not enough time to grow any channel by that amount, probably. So the other side of support challenge matrix is, as I'm giving challenge to people, what is the support that I'm giving them to help them get there? Now support could be, coaching that I'm giving them. It could be encouragement that I'm giving them. It could be resources organizationally, time, money, additional reports. And the overall way that we think about it is, am I bringing a good combination of high challenge, high support? So an easy way that I apply this, there's a lot of different kind of tangible ways that I try to play this out, but I saw this years ago and I loved it and I stole it. So, I don't know who originally came up with this, but at the end of every one-on-one that I have, I always ask the same question. What can I be doing to help you? Right? Even though they report to me, I'm asking them, what can I do to help you? What can I do to support you? What do you need? Do you need more clarity? Do you need more resources? Do you need some encouragement? Like, what is it? And then my job as their leader is to make sure they're getting the support that they identify that they need. And sometimes that I'm giving them support that they don't even know that they need, but I know that they need. And am I bringing a balance of those two things? When you're in an environment where there's high challenge and no support, you typically feel like I'm getting a lot of high bars and anger, but I'm not getting any of the things I need to accomplish them. When you get an environment that is high support but low challenge, it's a protectionist environment where nobody's really held accountable and the organization doesn't accomplish much because we're all kind of giving each other hugs and congratulating each other, but nobody's saying, hey, you know what we did last week wasn't good enough, we've got to be better, guys. Nobody's kind of pushing the pace, nobody's raising the standard. And then obviously the most toxic is when there's low support, low challenge, and like this is probably like probably the worst stereotype of a governmental agency. Like you walk into the DMV and the people don't particularly seem concerned with excellence or that they're particularly well supported in their job and nobody really wants to be there. And maybe this is the kind of environment a lot of times people will kind of silent quit in, where they're like they're there but they're not really there. So we're trying to create that combination of high support and high challenge.
Do you have, going back to that tightrope analogy, thinking through when to hold people accountable for failing on something versus when to say, hey, we set a goal that was too ambitious here, or there are extenuating circumstances, and giving them some leeway there is also, I think, another big challenge. Like I'm thinking right now, just through one of our team members, yeah, just great team member, but a quarter happened where just two to three things just didn't get done, and it was
Yeah.
yeah. So thinking through that, and those are hard conversations to have again for that tightrope. How do you think about that? Do you have and maybe you can think of someone specifically where this has happened in your org, obviously without naming them or the specifics, but are there markers you look for? Does it just kind of you get to know someone and intrinsically winners, or everyone's going to have these, everyone's going to fall short of time, otherwise your goals are you're just sandbagging all the time. But how do
Yeah.
you, to me, that has been one of also one of the big challenges about being a great leader, but also one that is a fair leader. And that fair part, I think, is important.
So I've got some really practical pieces of advice, but I'll start a little bit more general, which is business is basically the organizing of human capital, and successful business people are superior at attracting exceptional human capital and retaining that exceptional human capital. I don't really ever hear people say it that way, but that's pretty much what it is. If
Yeah.
you are really good at getting really smart, really gifted people to come and want to work with you and for you, and you're able to keep them, then you win. Like that is not always, like occasionally the market does something screwy, there's a COVID event or whatever, but like generally that's how you make a lot of money. That's how you build a successful business. So at a really fundamental level, we should all be asking the question, like, how do I do that? One thing that is true about people, people are not static. They have ups and downs. If you think about the last 2 years of your life, there have been weeks where you have been great, and there have been weeks where you are not, and you are barely there. And it could be because of a diagnosis. It could be because, you had a fight with your wife or your kid, or it could be something going, a death in the family, whatever. Like, we are not static people. So one thing that is a ironclad principle is that if people believe that you are for them, and that if you show them grace, encouragement, and you help them through the dips, then they will stick with you and they will be insanely loyal to you because they know that you care about them and because they've seen that demonstrated. Now, not everybody gets that, right? Like sometimes if somebody's brand new to a position and they've been here for a month and they're just blowing everything off, it's like, well, that's probably a different story. But at this point, I my core people that report to me, I would say that I have known them as a group. I have 12 reports, and I bet I have between 2 and 300 years of relational history with that group of 12 people. So as a result, you can imagine how powerful that is in a business context. Like I don't have to worry about LinkedIn people getting on LinkedIn and like prying away a key leader from my team. It's like it's just not happening, right? Like I was there when their kids were born. Like there's like actual like deep relationship. I've been through divorces with people. I've been through, really hard financial situations with people. And listen, the reality is a lot of those times, those challenging periods, they were not able to perform at their best. So as a leader, me being aware of that and understanding this is a time for support and not a time for
Mm-hmm.
challenge is key. So even your best people are going to need some periods where challenge is not the right button to press. And you can see an immature leader a mile off in that they don't have any sense of nuance with this. It's like challenge is just a button that they pound, kind of like those monkeys that they get the little treat every time they hit the button. They just, like that they'll just like, oh, good leadership is just push, 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 push more. And it's like, that's not effective leadership. It's not nuanced. It doesn't work. With that said, I think some principles that are helpful when somebody is not performing well. The first is, in general, the attitude we want to have as a leader, first and foremost, when things go well, we point out the window, we point at everybody else. When things go poorly, we point first and foremost at ourselves. So, like, think about it this way: anytime something goes poorly in our organization, at some level, it's my fault, right? At some level, either I didn't set clear enough direction, or I put a person, I was responsible for a hiring mechanism that hired somebody who was not suited to be able to do that job, or the organization didn't provide them the clarity of exactly what they needed to do along with the resources or whatever. But I've got blood all over my hands if something doesn't go well, no matter what it is. Leaders typically the strong leaders get this. Weak leaders just, unless there's a direct tie to like something that they did, they just point outward. They point out the window when things go badly, and they point in the mirror when things go well. So you want to be the inverse of that. You point out the window, you point at everybody else when things go well. When things go poorly, you point in the mirror and you're looking at yourself. And that attitude makes a big difference. Second one, in public, you emphasize all the ways that you could have been better, but you're not afraid to say that as an organization and as a team, this was not up to our standard. And it's the praise in public, it's the criticize in private. And then in private, it's if you can have a mindset of, hey, listen, this did not go well. And I clearly see these 3 or 4 things that I could have done better. Or, I'd like to know how I could have set you up to do better, but this just was not good enough. We have got to be better. And being willing to have the hard conversations with people. And a lot of times when you start to have those hard conversations, you learn a lot about whether or not you've got the wrong person or you've just got a rough patch. The wrong type of person is going to be defensive. They are going to be blaming others. They are going to disagree. They are not going to accept responsibility. The right type of person is going to be like, you are right. This is not my best. I'm sorry. I want to do better. Here's ways you can help me. And they're going to push towards it. And the reality is that's how you build exceptional teammates. Is we learn so much more through the times that don't go well than the times that do, right? So this is actually when leadership matters the most, and it's when you can make the most impact in somebody's life as a leader, when you're that person who is actually displaying some grace and some belief in them. To use another weightlifting analogy that I really like, if you imagine bench pressing, a lot of times when you bench press, you have somebody that's spotting you. And so to go back to our analogy, that you're trying to push yourself towards failure, but failure is kind of dangerous. And so if you're trying to lift as much weight as you've ever lifted and you don't have somebody spotting you, that could be kind of dangerous. What we're functionally doing as leaders is we're the spotter for somebody. And we're saying, I'm going to help you to lift more weight than you've ever lifted before. But I am going to be there for you when that takes you all the way to failure. Because I'm going to push you to failure so that you can unlock your best self, but I'm going to allow you to not let that bar is not going to drop on you whenever that happens. I'm right there and I've got you. And that's support challenge in a nutshell. And it's in these moments when it doesn't go great. Like if you really are giving high challenge to people, you should expect that they're going to fail some, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, I love that we talked for, over an hour and didn't talk at all about drinkware, cups, anything like that.
We did not talk about water bottles and tumblers, and I'm okay with that. That's great.
Oh no. That was my goal. I mean, I think what you have built with a focus on team and generosity and culture and performance, but also like compassionate performance. If it sounds very cheesy, but that's what came out. I mean, it's way more interesting to me than Amazon and water bottles and things like that. And I guess I would suspect it's more interesting to you too. So a ton of admiration and respect for what you've built over at Simple Modern along with your team. So thank you for doing this. And I think for people that are listening, places they can continue to follow up with what you're doing. Of course, simplemodern.com. Check out the amazing line of products and drinkware that they have over there. We didn't even get any into the story there. It's a very cool one. But check out that. And then you also talk a little bit about the 2 podcasts that you do. You do the Operators podcast, which is phenomenal for e-commerce junkies, and then the Scale for Good podcast. Give people a little preview of those 2, if you would.
Yeah, 2 pretty radically different. I mean, Operators, I think it's like us practically talking about running e-com, specifically businesses, but it's 4 guys running 9-figure businesses. And then we have guests on from time to time. And then Scaling for Good is very different. It's much more in line with this, where I'm talking about culturally, how do you build a strong culture? How do you put some of these things at play? And then I did a second season that was all about talking with the people that helped build Simple Modern. So we talk very specifically and contextually. If you are trying to build a CPG company, if you're trying to build an omni-channel company, there's some stuff that is being given away for free there that is insanely valuable. It's super niche, but it's really helpful. In fact, and then there's some other stuff that's just interesting. Like Brian, my co-founder, and I, we did an episode where we talked about being co-founders and what are all the challenges of being co-founders, and what have we learned through the process. I did an episode with my wife of like, hey, what's it like being married to an entrepreneur, and going through the process, the ups and downs that come with that. So I think there's some really good stuff in there that's a little bit different. And then in addition to that, I will post. I have these kind of flurries on social media where I'll post a lot, and then I won't post for like 6 days, and then I'll post a lot. So kind of depends on what's going on in life. But on Twitter and LinkedIn are the best places to follow me online.
Yeah. Both are fantastic listens. Can't recommend them strongly enough. So, Mike, thank you for doing this. Love what you're doing over there in Oklahoma City, man. And thanks for sharing the knowledge and keep up the good work, man.
Absolutely. You as well. Thanks for having me here, and thanks for everything you do for the e-commerce community. I know that the community you've built has helped a lot of people be able to build valuable businesses and be able to get to the next level. I think you bring people together where they can share ideas, and it's just really valuable. So I'm very appreciative of you as well.
Yeah. Thanks, man.